So I have many clients that have come to me over the years and said, I learn bechavrusa, I study with a guy, or I go for coffee, or every month I have breakfast with somebody. And I'm now at this point where we're friends, we're wonderful friends, but it's not translating into any money for our organization. So in our own situations, I'm sure you've encountered this type of problem. And it's not due to a lack of effort. I mean, the type of things that we're doing throughout the year is a lot. Coffee or meals, Torah study partner, mishloach manot. I heard at the end about the idea of you doing a creative or, really creative mishloach manot. I daven in the same shul. It's a guy who I sit next to for the last 6 years. I see them every day. I see them at the Kiddush Club or calls before Yom Noram, before Rosh Hashanah, Yom Kippur. I make those calls. I do all this legwork. But for some reason, it's not translating into giving for our organization. So it's very frustrating. So this is the pain point I'd like to talk today about. Go beyond coffee is the topic of the session, is the name of the session. We're going to address how to really get to the bottom of it. So why do we feel like we're walking away empty-handed? So my own background, I'm Jonah Halper. My own background, I'm an annual campaign guy. I worked for, my career started at the Associated, which is the Jewish Federation in Baltimore. I worked there for a handful of years. I ended up going to northern New Jersey, the Jewish Federation there. And then I ended up working for a couple of years for Shalva, the special needs organization, helping them raise money back before they had the big fancy building in Jerusalem. If you've ever been there, the special needs organization, they're absolutely incredible. But I was taught how to raise money like a typical annual fund, annual campaign guy, which meant I started my career dealing with a volume of low-level donors. There would be like affinity groups. It would be like, for example, a doctor's division, or when I started fundraising, I was 20 years old, so I was doing young leadership, and I was too young to drink at the bars that they would do events at. Like, Jonah, come get a drink. I'm like, yeah, no, I'm having orange juice tonight. But that's what you start at. When you start raising money, you're raising money from $18 donors, $50 donors, $100 donors, and then you start moving on to different types of campaigns that go beyond that. They're still maybe community-oriented. For example, a Super Sunday telethon, if you remember those, where you'd go in and have like a rows and rows, kind of looks like the room that we're in. You'd have rows like this, and everyone would have a old-fashioned telephone with the wire cord, and then you would just sit there and make calls, and you'd have your pledge cards of your donors that you were responsible for fundraising from. So I started running that, being in charge of the $2 million campaign that we did in those telethon calls over the series of a number of nights a week. So I know how to raise money from annual campaign donors. So it goes from there and it moves into what you would call major gifts. And major gifts in an annual campaign is, a dinner, you solicit your major gift donor. A crowdfunding campaign, you solicit your major gift donor. So the context of which I learned how to raise money from was within the operation of an annual campaign. Go to your donor in advance of the dinner and say, would you please consider a gift of $10,000 or $25,000? So that is the world that I came from, the world that I learned how to raise money from. However, that's not where I am today. I've had a kind of an evolution of my own understanding and education. And also I was introduced, and I'll introduce them in a moment, but I was introduced to professionals who come from a very different background, not an annual campaign background, that was very enlightening to me. But I want to share, I've shared this before in another conference, but I want to share kind of an evolution of thinking that I had. This is Rabbi Mordechai Shane, the Chabad of Tenafly. About 15 years ago, he got a $30 million gift, a very large gift, unusual for our institutions, whether it's Chabad or a Jewish school or whatever the case may be. To get a $30 million gift, it makes the news. And I remember at the time I was working at the Jewish Federation in northern New Jersey, which obviously Tenafly is northern New Jersey. And I remember my boss saying something to me which stuck with me. He said, "Oh, what a shame. I can't believe this donor gave his money to a rinky-dink Chabad house in Tenafly, New Jersey, right? When he could have given $30 million to the Federation of Northern New Jersey, which has an operating budget of $14 million. Imagine the impact he would have had he given that money to the Federation instead of to the Chabad house, right? Bad decision making. And that stuck with me. As a younger Federation fundraising professional, I was like, oh, yeah, I guess that kind of makes sense. If you have a tremendous amount of money, don't give it to a tiny operation that maybe has a operating budget of $750,000, maybe $1 million a year, go give it to an institution that runs $14 million a year. They could really use the $30 million. It would make a huge difference. So that was 15 years ago. Now, more recently, you might be aware about the Ruth Gottesman, the Gottesman gift. Her husband passed away, and Ruth Gottesman had been an employee of the Einstein Medical Center, the college, and she left them $1 billion, okay? Again, that's one of those gifts that you read about from universities and from hospitals. So like, that's a big gift, and it's a Jewish gift. So I obviously read the article, and I'm reading the article, and it says all the things that you would expect in an article like this, to talk about her background and why this organization was important to her, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And about 3/4, almost at the end of the article, it had like a one sentence there that really stuck out to me. It said that the medical center is not going to change its name from Einstein to Gottesman. It's going to stay as Einstein. So that was interesting to me, because that was buried really at the end. And if you give $1 billion, you can name whatever you want. Right? You want to name it the Mickey Mouse College of Medicine, you could go ahead and do that. It's a tremendous amount of money. So the fact is that they just said, oh yeah, no name change. We're going to leave it as the Einstein College of Medicine. Right? That's what we're going to do. No name change. So what I was thinking at this point, which was only about half a year ago, was that this makes a lot of sense. Why? Because she's not interested in supporting the college because of a vanity opportunity. Now, of course, when you have a capital campaign and doing something really of that size, there is, we all have some levels of cover that we'd appreciate, and for some people, putting your name on something is valuable. But it did not surprise me that for her that wasn't important. Why? Because she's a real partner in the university. She had a vision. The college had a vision of making tuition gratis, costs nothing to go to the university, which means that they can be more selective. It means that they can make sure that graduates come out without being laden with tremendous amounts of debt. And for a number of factors, it was going to really transform the industry, transform the new graduates and what it would mean to the medical community. And that's why she gave. It wasn't the fact that it would be called the Gottesman College of Medicine or something along those lines. So the evolution in thinking really came about as I started meeting professionals who were in the university and the hospital setting. My colleague Jason Zwang, wave. Hey, Jason. So Jason came on board with my firm, coming from a university background, and I started meeting through Jason and through others, other Jewish professionals who were not working in a Jewish setting. And I started seeing that they were coming from a background that was not an annual campaign background. It wasn't what I was used to doing and seeing and experiencing. They were coming from a completely different dynamic where they were raising from prospects. They would have their 20, 25 prospects that would range anywhere from $1 million on up. Major gifts or visionary gifts, but we're going to talk more about what that means. The idea that these individuals are giving at a much higher level don't make sense in an annual campaign format. If you think about it, let's say your dinner raises $500,000 a year. So is there any appropriate avenue to go to a donor for a $3 million gift for your annual dinner? No, your whole dinner doesn't raise that amount of money. So what's the context? How are you going to go to someone for a much larger gift if the context is a $500,000 dinner or a crowdfunding campaign for $200,000, right? Yes, you'll get donors that are commensurate to those campaigns, but you're not talking about donors who are going to give in the millions. So this was something that I was really intrigued by, and I wanted to go further down the rabbit hole. And because I started seeing the way they were behaving with this type of visionary giving in the university setting, I started realizing that some of the things that we do, even on an annual campaign level, is a little misplaced. A lot of the techniques on moves management that we've heard from Rabbi Yaakov Cohen and from others about how to put into places are vital. But the types of engagement or how we engage them, there are a lot of best practices that we could be learning from outside of our typical annual campaign approach. So annual campaign giving helps you build a base of major donors, right? It's proof of concept that they're supporting your annual campaign. It's saying we're investing in who you are today, and it establishes trust in your work. If I take $5,000 from you or $1,800 from you or even $18 from you, I'm able to do the good work that I'm doing with your support, and therefore, as a donor, you're saying, oh, wow, they're doing good work in the community. Whatever it is, whether it's a school, whether it's a social service, a JFS, a Jewish Big Brother, Big Sister League, whatever the mission may be, if you are taking my money on an annual basis and you're doing good work with it, you are establishing trust. You're building a base of major donors and you're establishing trust. So what I'm saying now is not a replacement saying, okay, this what we see in a university setting is going to kind of sunset what we've always done. No. You need to run a proper annual campaign, and you are going to develop relationships for donors, for dinners, crowdfunding. Don't worry, Tom, crowdfunding's A-okay. Keep working with CauseMatch, and there's tremendous amount of value there. What I want to talk about is what the good makings are of a visionary gift, the gift that is much bigger than what your annual campaign supports, and how we can learn from that. A visionary gift is about understanding the hopes and dreams, right? It's not incremental. So if you recall when an article came out not that long ago, a 23-page spread in the Mishpacha magazine about the tuition crisis, right? Which the tuition crisis hasn't really changed. Every 20 years, it's basically the same problem. You could read an article probably from 20 years ago and it looks much the same as it does today. But when you read the article, it talks about a very formidable problem, both in terms of what it means on the professional side, what it means to run a school, and also what it means as a donor and what it feels for them. So no one's coming away feeling good, right? And the article doesn't say, and we've got the answer. You know, when you get the 23-page article, you're hoping by page 20, you're gonna start seeing some solutions like, oh, we actually have a path forward. You don't really feel that way when you read this article. And I wrote a response the next week that was in the Rosh Hashanah issue about the need to go much more visionary focused, right? Incremental is not gonna get you there. We need to start talking about visionary giving that will help you really transform your school in a much bigger way. So let's go a little further down what that can mean. So as you might have heard, I've been using the word transform, right? Incremental fundraising, if your operating budget is X and we need to get to Y and we need to make payroll, those things, that is going to help you in an incremental way, and your annual campaign will suffice. Your annual campaign, if it's done properly, you're going to achieve 20% increase if you're doing great, but some kind of baseline of support, and to increase that year over year. But what we're talking about really now is transformation, right? If your vision is transformative, then their giving will be transformative. A lot of times we might feel that, oh, if I ask for something too big, the donor will be like, that's sticker shock, right? I can't give at that level. However, very often our donors are more excited about something that solves a real problem than something that's incremental. So I've worked on many capital campaigns, and we've found many times that the full dream of a capital campaign is often much more compelling than the kind of stepped up version saying, okay, well, we can get by with this. And there's often a temptation when you're developing something like a capital campaign, which is transformative, right? You're not investing in a capital campaign because of the sheetrock and fluorescent lighting. It's not about that. It's about where this building and school is going for the next 25 years. You're talking about a much bigger vision. So if your vision is big, your donors often start salivating. They get excited. Ooh, this is something I'm excited about. If you're setting a campaign goal based on what I think the community can handle this, I think this will pass the smell test, I think there's an appetite for this. If that's the demarcation for what you're setting your campaign goal at, then that might not be as appealing, and you might raise more money with the more ambitious goal, with plan B and plan C in case there is not that support in the community, which we could talk about in another capital campaign discussion. But ultimately, what you're doing is you're setting that full dream, and the full dream is important. So what we need to do in Jewish philanthropy, as I've mentioned already, is that we're going to go from annual campaign thinking to visionary gift living. And it's going to hopefully transform the way you do all your fundraising, including major gifts and also even the $18 donor. So what it's really coming down to is about the types of conversations that you're having with your donors. So I'm not going to be talking about some esoteric system or theoretics. It's going to be something that is much more practical. It's going to be something that you can implement, that is implemented in outside of the Jewish community. So what we're going to talk about, we're really going to focus on number 1 and 2 today, but I will touch about how it impacts 3 and 4. But when you're talking about having a conversation with a donor that's visionary, that's going to set a goal that's much bigger than where you are today, you have to know yourself. Now, I wrote a book called Date Your Donors, and a basic premise of the book is if you don't know yourself, you can't go court somebody else, right? In your personal life. If you don't know who you are, what you want in life, what your values are, do you want to live in the city or the suburbs? Do you want 2 kids or do you want 12 kids? Do you want a Torah education for your kids? What kind of education do you want for your kids? These are types of things to think about, because when you go look for somebody to spend the rest of your life with, you're hoping that they share those values. You can't go hunt for that other person unless you know who you are. So a big piece of the exercise when it comes to visionary giving and how to revisit how you have conversations with your donors requires you to be a little introspective. And also, not only to set your own priorities, your own values and figure that out, but then you need to be able to inventory that. You could just pay lip service to it. You could say, oh yeah, Israel, we're a Zionistic school. Are you? You could say it. You could say, like many schools might say, academic excellence. Okay, that's nice. Do you have that? Can you demonstrate that? So being able to take inventory of your priorities is incredibly valuable in developing these relationships with donors. And then, of course, then you can start doing 3 and 4, which is how you're engaging with those potential donors. How are you having conversations with those donors that will transform the type of conversation you're having with them? Instead of you going into a meeting and saying, hi, my name is Jonah Halper. I represent this organization. We do this, we do this, we do this, we do this, we do this. Whoa, slow down, right? Like this is not you dumping everything that you have in front of them. It's about being introspective and listening to what they have to offer and having a much higher caliber conversation. And then, of course, that will impact your solicitations. Okay, so let's talk about setting your priorities. This is not a kumbaya type of exercise. Like, this is something that is concrete and incredibly, incredibly valuable. We say in Pirkei Avos, Shalosh Devarim Olam Hamed, right? The world stands on 3 things, Torah, Avoda, and Gemilut Chasadim, right? That's our platform. If you're a politician and you're running for office, you have a platform. You might have 40 or 50 different things that are important to you in your campaign or in your organization, but you have to be able to distill it down into a couple key points that all the things that you do roll up into those priorities, right? So I'll give you an example. We have a client in California, in Orange County, and their 3 priorities are they're a Zionistic school. They have academic excellence around their STEAM program, science, technology, engineering, arts, and math. I don't know why I have to tell you that you're literally school people. A lot of other people need to hear that. But STEAM is science, technology, engineering, arts, and math. And then they're like middos. They're the midot, like the social emotional intelligence, how people treat each other, how they treat, the development of that. So those are their 3 pillars, right? Zionism, their commitment to Israel, they focus on academics around STEAM, and how they raise these kids to be mentioned, how to be proper boys and girls. That's their priorities. And everything that they do within that school needs to roll up into those 3 buckets. How do we demonstrate our commitment to these things from that perspective? So what I want you to do, and it's a little bit of an actual exercise, because I think this is billed as an actual workshop. So I want to give you an opportunity to do a little bit of workshop stuff. Is I want you to think about your own why, right? Whether you lift it from him or Simon Sinek, but the idea of saying like, what are we in the business of doing? Why do we do what we do is important to be able to demonstrate what your three priorities are. So one of the exercises I like to ask is, either if you were there from the founding of a school, why did you start your school, right? Whether you were a founder or you were from the first who were there. And if that's not the case, use this exercise. What would happen if it disappeared tomorrow? Because a lot of times the absence of having what you have makes you go, oh, well, then we have some real problems. Good. Write down what those real problems would be. Write down what it is that you bring to your community and your school, whether maybe it has implications on the community at large, on the how you educate your students that might be different than how other folks educate your students, how you're serving a particular population. But being able to communicate why you're in business is something that is absolutely important. If you can't speak with confidence about who you are, then no one else is going to appreciate that. In fact, it's the number one thing that people will notice when you have a conversation with them. The number one compliment a fundraiser gets is not that you can sell ice cubes to Eskimos or that you can sell me the Brooklyn Bridge. That's not the number one compliment. The number one compliment a fundraiser gets is, I see you believe in what you're doing, right? It comes out of every fiber of your being. Right? They'll be like, I'll have what he's having. Like, you really have this desire to want to be connected to somebody who has that fire inside them, and it comes out in every conversation. That comes from your clarity on your mission. Why are you in the business of what you're doing? And you should be able to clearly state this. We exist because. So if you want to take a few minutes, I'll give you an opportunity to write it down, because the next piece of your priorities, I'm going to ask you to, again, workshop some of that stuff. So if you want to now take a few minutes, wait 2 or 3 minutes, to write down a couple key points that you say, this is why the school was either started, or this is what would happen if the school ceased to exist tomorrow, blinked out of existence. Go ahead. All right, is anyone bold enough to share their school's why we exist? I'll throw a little carrot. If you raise your hand, I'll give you a copy of my book that I have at the podcast station in the room. So I'll give you a free copy of the book if you raise your hand. There you go. Congratulations.
I think that ROI is, I'll start with the second question. I'm the only yeshiva day school in Houston. So why has become, over the last about 20 years, that we are providing a very warm and loving environment for children and their Yiddishkeit to grow. And we believe very strongly, in spite of this growth, that we want to reach every child every day.
Anyone else? Yes, Rakana.
The school starts with a vision to teach girls to know Torah and to teach others and to be leaders in the future. We have today more than 3,000 shluchos, educators, leaders in communities all over the globe. We have 2,800 students. So if the school, God forbid, to stop, we're going to lose future of the house of Israel for the future generations to come.
Wow. Thank you. Yes.
If I understand it correctly, you're basically saying, what is your mission statement, right?
Yeah, in essence. But the reason why I avoid asking that question is because people will immediately go to the canned sentence that they have. And what I found is that when you're having a conversation with a donor, they're not interested in you parroting the mission statement. They're interested in saying, they want to hear from your kishkas. They want to hear, like, what is it that really moves you? Why do we exist? And often, and everyone's going to use their own language and verbiage to be able to communicate that. So that's usually why I ask it for this way, because I want them to be able to, you walk out of this room and say, oh, I should tell this donor, I should find ways to incorporate this kind of conversation style into my day-to-day. But yes, in essence, yes, you're right. So this now starts focusing on what are our priorities. I mentioned like the school in Orange County, California. Now, you'll see there's two categories here, operational priorities and visionary priorities. I separate them out because there is often, when you talk about what do we need for the next 5 years, that could say, this is a priority of our school, this is where we're going, this is how we're gonna grow. A lot of times we'll end up focusing on some things that are not necessarily visionary, they're not something that scales in any big way. It's something that like, okay, well, we need to totally revamp our air conditioning system in our school. Right? Well, it's okay, that is ambitious and it might be something that you need to do and it's a capital project, but it's not something that truly grows with your organization, right? The defining characteristics of visionary is it scalable, right? You only buy your air conditioning unit once, or once in a Yovel. Does it align with your mission and vision? And is the donor the hero, right? Does the donor feel like they're making an outsized impact? Are they really problem solving? So the idea of kind of writing down now, what are some of the things that are your priorities, the visionary? Like, what does your school look like in 5 or 10 years from now? What are some of the components, right? I'm not even asking you yet to come down to the top 3. What I'm going to ask you to do is to try to consolidate a lot of your visionary ideals into something that is a kind of a 3-pillared approach, but ultimately to start thinking, what does our school look like in 5 or 10 years if we had another $1 million, $3 million, $10 million, whatever the number that you need to really move the needle. But ultimately, what are the things that you need to be able to take to the next level? Because what we're discussing here is really a leadership issue, right? The article I mentioned in the Mishpacha magazine about incremental fundraising, it's a little bit of an indictment on leadership to say, well, we're not aiming high enough. If we're okay with discussing, we need to make payroll a bit more, and I'll give you a case study a little bit later. But if that's the conversation we're having, then you're really missing an opportunity to engage with your donors in a much more meaningful and big picture way. Yeah.
I'm curious who these, some of us are development professionals, not executive directors,
Sure.
These the board, these kinds of questions seem more like on a board level conversation to be having. We work in the development office. It's challenging to develop professional. Maybe these conversations aren't being had. How do we?
It is a challenge because yes, what you're talking about, it is a top-down component. It's saying, well, there's the professional leadership, there's the CEO, executive vice president, or whoever it is. You've got your lay leadership, whether it's the executive committee and the rest of the board, depending on how active that board is. But you are absolutely correct. In other words, you need to hear that message from the top, because obviously you can promise people lots of things, and if it's not being bought in, 100%. 100%. So yes, but I think it's more of, you may not be able to go back to work on Monday and say, let me develop what those visionary ideas are, but more of saying, like, I can sit down with the CEO and say, maybe we're not aiming high enough, right? So this will at least open up for those people who are in a position to be able to go back to a CEO or executive director or whoever their role may be, if you don't have the ability to kind of, roll out that kind of vision, but to kind of demand and manage up and say, like, look, I think we have donors who are looking for something much more compelling than we're offering right now. What would that look like? If we had to paint a picture of our priorities and what kind of things we could have in 5 or 10 years, and put away the dollar signs for a moment, just what would that look like? And then we'll discuss the money, is something, an exercise that I think is absolutely worth having, and it's often not done. So, but yes, the answer is to just go back, might feel stuck, but the idea is that, if there's an avenue for you to have those conversations, that's really where it needs to start. Yeah. So if you want to take a few minutes now and write, obviously it's on here right now, but your own list of priorities, the things that you see as having opportunity to truly transform your institution in a meaningful way, in a place that would get you excited as you're writing down, like, oh, if we could have this, if we could have that. These are the things that are really going to elevate your organization or school at a level you never had before. Jason, this is your world. Is there anything else you would add to this?
I don't think that you necessarily have to have leadership buy-in. I'll tell you why. I disagree.
Hey, just come around here for a second.
But I think tactically, if you understand what your organization does, and you go to your executive director and you say, this is kind of what we do. Here's how I want to talk about it on the road. Here's how I want to talk about it outside the school. Is it okay with you? You roll it up to these 3 big buckets, and they're like, yeah, that makes sense. Go with it. Right? Because what's important is that the donors understand what your school is doing in a way that speaks to them. That's what I would say, because we need to open up the faucets here for conversation and dollars and without bureaucracy. Right? So as long as they line up, I wouldn't go, off the beaten path and start making things up. But if you can coordinate it in a way that seems to roll up in the big picture topic you're talking about, I think we do these 3 ways, I think you're probably good.
Right. So just to give you like an example, if you say, let's say you're Orlando Torah Academy, you're in a burgeoning Jewish community, and it's transforming right in front of your eyes. The landscape of the Jewish community is growing tremendously. You might say, okay, well, we've got some priorities, that we have some things that we need to address. Tuition might be too high, we want to lower tuition. We have capacity and we want more students. Or the community grew, we need to have a wider reach. So there might be some things that you might say that all rolls up to access to Jewish education. There may all be important priorities, but each one of those things kind of rolls up to this idea of, we want to make sure our school provides access to anyone who needs a Jewish education, and it addresses these components. Or you might say, our students should have pride in their Yiddishkeit. Our students should feel connected to their community, the community that they're in, and our students should feel responsible to make a difference, right? All wonderful, right? If that's a real big goal that you have for them, it leads up to that concept of achrayut, right? The idea of achrayus, to say that there needs to be this sentiment from the students that we're educating our students, that they are proud of who they are, they want to be involved in the community, and they want to make a difference. Beautiful. One more. Our students should love themselves. Our students should love their classmates. Our students should support each other, right? Maybe it's living with Ahavat Yisrael, living with Ahavas Yisrael, right? Something like that. Again, it consolidates the things that you're doing. So each of you, I'm not here to dictate what your priorities are, and they could be very, very specific to your institution, but they all are incredibly valuable. So now when I hit the road and I start talking about a particular priority of my school, right? Now I have my buzzwords, but more importantly, what it means is that I can do much more active listening, because no donor of mine is going to be interested in all 3 buckets. Usually, there's something within your school, your institution, that they go, this is why I love the school. And I can immediately smell out when I get solicited on occasion, just like I'm sure everyone else does. And I know there's one guy, I'll give you a real example. I won't name names, but you'll probably know who it is. There's a young guy who started an organization in Baltimore that focuses on bullying. He has a camp and he does bullying education in the school. And I had mentioned to him, it was like an early conversation, I had mentioned one thing to him. I said, oh yeah, I was bullied in high school. This is something that really is important. And he doesn't tell me anything about the camp. He doesn't tell me anything about all the things that he does, because I know he does a bunch of things. I get a steady diet of bullying education, of what he's doing with the schools that are educating them and the stories that he's coming from that, and he's turned me into a donor. Why? Because instead of him coming into the meeting and say, we do this, we do this, we do this, we do this, now he's able to take a step back and say, let me have a conversation with this person. Let me qualify this donor and see what is it that's important to them. And ask good probing questions, and there are some wonderful questions, and we have a great white paper that has a long laundry list of good, open-ended, like speed dating kind of questions, where we give you the opportunity to say, why is this important to you? Why do you give to our school? What are your motivations? What do you want for your kids? When you ask good questions, then it is actually really enlightening about people's motivations, because we can make an assumption. We're navel gazing. We're in our schools. We think we're the greatest things in sliced bread. When someone gives it to our school, we're like, of course they give to our school. Yes, of course they give to your school, but if you can ask them what it is about the school that they love, it might be something very different than what you love. And how you talk to your donors now is going to transform, because you're doing much more active listening, and now you're able to say, I am going to give them a steady diet of the priority that they've brought up. So what you should be able to start hearing now is that there is almost like a there is a scalable approach on how you can cultivate donors in a way that gives them what they want to hear. I guarantee if you've got 7 donors who are in the, we're a Zionistic school, if you have 7 donors that you've identified and had conversations with, and you know that they support FIDF, you know they're Magen David Adom or United Hatzalah, right? You know this is the type of stuff they care about, so this donor is in that bucket, and you say out on the heels of that meeting, we've got the gym class coming up next week where they have like a giant floor map of Israel, and they run from Haifa to Tel Aviv or Tel Aviv to Eilat, right? It's something that's engaging, it's fun to get to interact with the kids, or there's a Yom HaTzmaut parade coming up, or there's a special lecture coming around the bend. You're able to come prepared and have a clearinghouse of engagement opportunities that roll up to the things that they care about. Not spamming them with 15,000 things the school does. It's the things that that will be meaningful to them. So I'm going to give you a real case study. I spoke about this on the podcast. We've written, Jason wrote an article about it in, what was the magazine? Hayedion with am I allowed to say Prisma at the EDS conference? All right, sorry. Sorry. Okay, but Torah Academy of Boston, Rabbi Benjamin Romelstein, who is not in the room. Nope, not in the room. What? Oh, wonderful. All right, good. Well, you could tell me if I got this mostly right. So Rabbi Benjamin Romelstein, and I'm actually originally from Brookline. I'm originally from Boston, so this meant a lot to me, and it was wonderful working with Torah Academy of Boston for a few years. But Rabbi Romelstein recognized he had a problem. One of his problems was he would hire wonderful educators, have great teachers, and they would thrive, and the kids would love them, and it was just a great experience. However, these teachers live in Boston. And when you live in Boston and your rent is too darn high, or you have problems with the fact that childcare, for you pay for your child to go to a childcare center is as much as what the mower is getting paid to teach in the school, it's not sustainable. So they'll be in Boston community in the Torah Academy for a couple of years, and then we're going to move to Timbuktu, someplace that has much cheaper rent, someplace that has much more affordable childcare. It's not sustainable. So what could he have done? He could have gone to donors and say, hey, I need to pay my teachers more salary, I need to do this, and better benefits, whatever it is. Can you, instead of giving your usual $5,000 gift, would you give $7,500 or $10,000? That he could have done that. But what he did was he said, well, let me get to the root of the problem, right? How can we transform this so that we are able to retain best-in-class teachers? So he said, well, you know what? If we are having a problem with teachers being able to afford their rent, let's purchase some homes and provide below market rent. Let's invest in an early childhood care center so that our teachers have a place to send their children to at below market rates. And now when he approaches a donor and says, our goal is to retain the best-in-class teachers, he's talking about investments in some major capital infrastructure. He's talking about investments in programming that goes beyond help us in an incremental way so that we can pay our teachers a little bit more. It's transformative. And when in some respects, he likes to he's a really modest guy, so he tends to downplay just how brilliant this was. But he was surprised when a donor who was a CJP, Jewish Federation of Boston donor, who was like, this is amazing, what you're doing is phenomenal. They latched in on this because he was thinking with a project that would be transformative, that would help the community. It would be transformative for all of Boston, and it's something, well, how can we apply these principles to other institutions that might be having similar problems? It just got the conversation at a new level that wasn't just putting a Band-Aid on an existing problem. It was not incremental. How'd I do? Okay. Thank you. So that sounds great, right? We've established that you need to have clarity in your priorities, and I want to now talk about how you can make this part of your general operations, how you can bake this in. Okay, so we've established that you're going to figure out what your three priorities are that majority of your programs and services roll up into. So first of all, you have a calendar of the year. So I'm not asking you to invent new things, right? If we've established that most of the things that you're doing rolls up into 3 buckets, there are probably a lot of things that you're doing throughout the year. It could be your Chumash play, it could be a Grandparents and Special Friends Day, it could be the science fair, right? If STEAM is important to you, then the science fair better figure prominently in what you're sharing with your donors. But there are already plenty of things that you can kind of take stock of and say, what do we do throughout the year that demonstrates our commitment to these 3 buckets? And then what you're going to do is you're going to start plotting those out and say, okay, here are the 8 things that we're going to share that relates to priority number 1. Here are the 6 things that relate over the course of the year to priority number 2 and priority number 3, et cetera. So being able to take that inventory is critical, because what's going to happen, and you can now take some time to think about what some of those things are in your school. Again, you don't have to do for all 3, but maybe just the exercise of saying, okay, if this is a priority, what are the things that we do throughout the year that demonstrate our commitment to that priority? What will happen now is that donor that you've qualified in a new way, you had a conversation, you identified, oh, they care about priority number 2. So now, instead of it just being a series of what we call general assets, go for coffee, mishloach manot, sitting next to them in shul and having a conversation or talking to them at the Kiddush Club. Those are all nice, and they can be put in throughout the year. But the core, the meat and potatoes, needs to be things that roll up to your priorities. So when we say, how is it that I learn a bichavrusa? I study this person for 2 years and I can't get comfortable with the solicitation. The answer is very simple. Because all your engagement has been what we call general assets. It's just with you and your personality, who they like you as a person, but they don't know anything really about what's going on in your organization. And you don't know, even though you've been learning with them for 2 or 3 years, necessarily what moves them about your work. And if anything at all, if they're interested in saving the whales, I don't care if they sit right next to you in shul and they make, they have $50 million in the bank. That they're not the right prospect, right? Maybe you should go to somebody who might be a little harder to get to, but their values align directly with you, and that would be way more worth your time than somebody who might be sitting directly next to you in shul. So being able to go through that exercise of saying, okay, I know what they care about. I know at the end of the line, here are major funding opportunities. There are 2 or 3 or 4 funding opportunities at the end of the road of this priority that I would love to get them excited about and get them to give to. And here are the things throughout the year that I can give them that will start paving the way to have that conversation and saying, I've got a project I think you might be interested in. Because it directly correlates to your entire experience that you've had. You don't have to say the last part, but that's really what you're doing. You're saying that you're giving them an opportunity to connect in a way now. They go, well, I saw the kids. I saw the piece that I really care about. So you got me. Like, it's not like just like, oh, I'll throw some money at you. Like, I'm really invested now. And you're telling me that there's an opportunity for me to fund something that is solving a problem. I can be that hero that can scale the organization in this area. You got me. That's how you get a $50 million gift. That's how you get a $100 million gift, is by having that kind of dynamic with your donors. And the donor thinks that they're getting some tailored experience. And I'm not saying this to be glib, but the idea is like, that donor feels like you listen to me. Now you're giving me these touch points throughout the year directly correlating to the thing that you know I care about. And then in a year and a half down the road, when you want to come to me for $1 million plus gift, it's directly related to my experience that I've had all year long. And if you've got 6 people in priority 1 and 8 people in priority 2 and 11 people in priority 3, now you've built yourself a major gift shop that looks like every other university or every other hospital that brings in these mega gifts. Because you've put in a system in place that allows you to develop relationships that are not just help us get around the corner. You'll solicit them for those dinner gifts, but now imagine what that dinner gift is going to look like if you have someone who's a visionary prospect. So you've got yourself somebody that you know what, with their wealth-based giving, they could do something of a serious magnitude that might be a year, 2 years out. But if I start giving them a steady diet of the things that they care about today, I have a strong feeling, and I'm sure you will experience this too, that they will start supporting your annual campaign, even in the short term, at levels that you've never seen before as well. So my hope is that this kind of transforms the way you think about how you engage with donors. Don't come in there, we do this, we do this, we do this. Don't blurt it all out, I'll vomit it all out onto them saying, I only got 20 minutes, I only got half an hour, I gotta get it all out. Ask them good questions. You ask them good questions, people love talking about themselves, they love to share their story, they love to share why they care about the things they care about, what their hopes and dreams are for them and their children. So what you'll see here, and again, it's kind of like a chart, similar to what you saw earlier, is that you can have it by month, and you can have a drop-down menu. You can build it out where you can have literally, if they care about this priority, here are the things I can select them for January, February, March, April. So you can go into any given month and know these are the engagement assets that roll up to the priority they care about, and I could plot that out for the year. I'm sure you'll call some audibles. There'll be some times where you're like, oh, no, we're doing this program, I got to invite this person, right? There'll be things that happen in the moment, but now it's an opportunity to really connect with them in a meaningful way. So, any questions? Right, Marcus?
So, the annual campaign is pretty straightforward in terms of you have a certain amount you need to raise, come up with a plan, you go to them this year, you go to them the next year, etc. When it comes to visionary, it's obviously a little bit trickier because let's say you had a priority of building a $30 million building, and you also want to build up a $30 million endowment. Let's just say, in terms of the results of your priorities, mean that this is what you want to do, let's just say, right? Running out of space, we need to build a building. We want to make sure that we had able to provide, let's say, lower tuition, etc. We want to build up an endowment, we could draw to a scholarship, etc. So you don't have the same, unless you're going to be getting mega donors, and each one going to a different avenue, which is maybe what you're suggesting. It's going to be very hard. Let's say you build your building in 3 years, and now it's your top priority because you're squeezing. And now you want to go ahead, okay, now we want to build up our endowment. You can't go back to that donor so fast because first of all, they're in the middle of a 5-6 year commitment, right? And just in general, you're going to hit fatigue at a certain point, right? So like, what exactly is the suggestion?
The problem is you went to the donor for the wrong thing in the first place. Because you went to them because you needed a building, not because of what they liked.
Okay.
So now you're trying to switch gears into something that maybe they'll like. That's the reason you can't go back quick. Their capacity, maybe not, right? It's not like they're just refreshing the well. They probably gave you a fraction of what they could actually give you. The difference is you were asking for something that you needed before, and now you're asking for something that they want to give to you. That's the transition.
And there's an irony here because the capital campaign could very well satisfy what they're interested in. You can, figure out what that is. Yeah, and so there's a couple of things I want to unpack. One of the other things you mentioned is that when it comes to the visionary giving, it's not necessarily coming from your biggest donors. I'll give you an example. There's a client that we're working with in Chicago, and one of their visionary gift prospects is not even someone who ever even gave them a 5-figure gift before. It's somebody they're an older couple, there was a student in the dormitory school, in the school that wasn't thriving in the dormitory setting. And this older couple has kind of adopted this boy to live in their home. And I don't mean like living downstairs in the basement and just, kind of checks in and out. They live on the bedroom floor with this older couple, and he sits down and eats dinner with the older couple. It was wonderful for everybody. The boy is thriving, the couple loves it, it's magical. Now this family truly understands what this student is and what it represents and what the school is now. And there's somebody who could seriously give of their wealth, what they've accumulated over the years, and they might not even be someone who has been a real donor on the radar, but because it's coming from, whether it's from inheritance, whether it's from selling a business, or just investments that they've made over the years, real estate, whatever the case may be, when it's coming to the time to say, I want to leave a legacy, that person might be someone that is worth having a discussion with. So I wouldn't even just assume that it's going to be the people who have already these 4 or 5 year commitments. And also, if that's the case and you can't go to someone who is doing a 4 or 5 year commitment, some of these conversations take a long time. I mean, Jason, and I know this for you, and I know this for other professionals, like these are not, it's hard to get out of the mindset of like, okay, we solicited for this, now we got to move on to this ask, and then this ask. Some of these conversations can take a couple of years to really turn into something. Yeah.
Right? So Jason also, so you have two campaigns, you have the big tackle, you have your endowment, let's say you have a third thing, whatever it is. What would be your approach in terms of, again, listening to the donor? Are you basically saying that you should align the donors into their interests and then have them funding that specific pool rather than trying to, again, sometimes it's a tug of war where you do have some immediate needs more than others, and let's say you have a building that you need 2 million next year, you I would say basically just avoid that and start talking earlier.
So what I would do is I would ask them really, really good questions at the beginning to understand what gets them motivated. And once you do that, you can start to see your capital project through a lens.
Yep. Right. If you establish your 3 priorities, these are your 3 priorities, I'm sure it's manifesting itself in okay, right, the building is not a building for the sheetrock and fluorescent lighting, as I said. You know, it's about where this school is going to be for the next 25 to 30 years. So you just need to find a way to say, am I hearing what they truly care about, and am I coming to them with a major ask that might be, and also could be compartmentalized. Some of it's building, because we need a place for this all to happen. Some of it might be programmatic, because they might endow a particular program that they truly care about that falls in line. So the ask might be, could have been this for the capital, could have been maybe this, if you're really laying into the things that they want to see into the future of the school, investing in. I'll give you an example. The school I was talking about in California, they had a donor who was, South African, South African, but he cared about Israel. That was his thing. So the school, which had Zionism as one of their components, they did all those things throughout the year to engage him, and then they solicited him for $1 million to basically endow the 8th grade class trip to Israel. Spin-off money that would seriously subsidize the ability for the kids to go to Israel. And they gave the gift. Why? Because he saw the kids all year long, and he saw the Israel stuff. It wasn't just lip service to it. And therefore, when it came, it wasn't just like you choose your own project. It's got to be a fundable project that you have the idea at the end of the line. If each of these priorities, what are the 2, 3, 4 things that could truly help the school in a meaningful way? And in your case, if it's a building project that's tied to that, then figuring out, okay, well, if I have somebody who cares about this priority, how am I going to approach them for a capital gift or an endowment gift or something like that that will correlate to those type of things? And the donor, I'm telling you, the conversations you have with the donors when you're actually asking these questions, I've had donors break down crying. When you ask them good probing questions, I met with, I was representing Tells Cleveland in Chicago, Cleveland, sorry, Tells Cleveland in Chicago. Tells Cleveland, this Tells Chicago. Yeah, sorry. I'm drinking decaf coffee nowadays. That's the casualty of that. But okay, so Tells Cleveland, and I was doing we were doing a pre-campaign study, a feasibility study, and I was interviewing their top 25 donors. Someone I met with was not in Cleveland, it's a different city, and he didn't look like a Telzer. Right? He looked very different than a Telzer. And one of the first questions I asked him, and it wasn't like he was covered in tattoos, that's not me, like his lavush was not like a Telzer chassid. So I said to him, you don't come across to me as someone who is a Telzer. How did you become a Telzer, and why do you appreciate Telz so much? And because I asked that question in a way that was really about him, right? He got emotional. He said, let me tell you why Telz was important to me. And I started realizing that when someone dies and they put on their matzeva that they were a Telzer, right, that doesn't happen by accident. That I need to unpack and figure out what is it about a school that will make somebody say, I identify as this type of place. And when you ask good questions, instead of you talking and doing all the talking, we do this, and saying, what is it about you, and what is important to you, and what do you want when it comes to Jewish education, and what does Torah look like for you, and where you're, then you start coming away with, I know what it's going to take to bring this person in. And it transforms that relationship we have with them. You will look different. If you employ this stuff, you will look different than every other person who knocks on the door and begs for their time.
Then let's say you got them to the capital gifts with this type of lens and getting them into their passion, etc. You're saying reapproach the endowment piece, although they're in the middle of this commitment, or in a sense.
First of all, again, if I know what my funding priorities are, what I need to fund, then it can go some very interesting ways. I don't know. I can't orchestrate to that degree. I'm getting what I want in the sense that I'm first listening to him, what he has. I know what's at the end of the road for me. I know what thing, if they want to save the whales, then we're not the right place for you. But if there's an alignment there and I can demonstrate a commitment to that ideal or that value, and then come to them and say, hey, I've got something I think you would really appreciate, then.
Your job is to listen to what they said and then pause and come back and think deeply about how you can accomplish that through your capital project. How this additional building or playground or gymnasium is going to accomplish what they really care about. And your job is to authentically connect the dots for them as to why this investment will have that outcome, right? As opposed to saying, we need a new building, can you make your obligatory?
Yeah, we did a capital campaign in Chicago for another school, and they went to a donor who was a young nursing home guy, and the approach that the EVP who I was working with said, oh, well, all his peers are giving out $100,000, I'm going to solicit him for $100,000. I'm like, okay, I understand why you're saying that, but what does he care about? He goes, well, he's very big into fitness, and he's very active and things like that. That's important to him. I said, okay, well, that's helpful. Like, don't we have stuff that we can appeal to him in that regard? He goes, yeah, but it's $250,000, so much more money than what I think he would give. So I said, well, first of all, have a conversation with him, let's confirm this, and then say, I was going to solicit you for 100K, right? Because that's what your peers are doing, but I know this is important to you. And it basically say, would you stretch? Would you do the 250? So instead of one of the things I always hate about a capital campaign is you go someone for their very big gift and they say they're not going to do that, and then you come down with a lower gift, which is still a very generous gift, and you're like, and everyone feels kind of gross. It's like, oh, you couldn't do the bigger number, so you come down and do the lower number. This is the opposite. It's like saying, it could be a $100,000 ask, but I really think I have something that would appeal to you. If they go down to the 100, then no love lost. If I can get them to 250 because I'm actually paying attention to what they're interested in, and they gave the 250. It was a 7-minute conversation I had with this executive vice president and saying, why don't you do it this way? And he had the conversation that way. He goes, let me talk to my wife. He went over the side, came back and said, we'll do the 250. So yeah, it's not again, that's me. It was just, again, a slight attitude adjustment of saying, I know you want the $100,000, but maybe, just maybe, we say, what do they want? And then we'll get a different type of ask. Yes, 5 minutes? Okay. Any last questions? We'll take 2 more questions. Yes.
So what about the things that are, say 10, 15 years ago, we started a learning center, we hired much more learning center staff to have small group instruction and give kids differentiated learning, whatever. So now it's kind of beyond, so it's really part of annual.
Part of
annual because we just keep hiring more and more learning specialists,
right.
But it's really beyond what tuition should be covering. So in some ways, it's the transformative thing, but we're already doing it.
Yes. So very often when that transformative piece is going to address some of the immediate needs, right? So when I said that we need to keep the best in class teachers, yeah, you have some transformative ideas about the real estate and all this, but to have some of the money allocated towards increasing salaries, the existing operations, that's part of the whole package deal. We need to, but if it was just that, it's not going to catch the appeal of a donor because you're not aiming big enough. If you're able to say, what does this program look like in 5 years from now, where it's adequately funded, where it's the best in class programming, we're kind of a light into the nations of our community, right? Like we're really, like what does that look like? And what does it take for us to do that? Then addressing some of your, obviously, your operating needs, like your payroll and things like that, are of course rolling up into that. But it's not necessarily just that. It's saying like, what do we need to do to elevate this so that I could say, with this amount of money, we are running a healthy, in the black, wonderful program that is not constantly saying like, we'd love to do this, but we don't have the money. We want to be in a position of strength where you can bring whatever you're hoping to bring into the program in a sustainable way.
But see, what he's saying, that sounds very reasonable, right? Pretty reasonable. You've got to understand the variables for it to be reasonable. So you have to create an environment with that donor where you can have a reasonable conversation. In order to do that, you've got to have them trust you. So that when you say things like this, they're like, okay, I know he's not blowing smoke, that makes sense. All the parts of this make sense. The tuition passing on to this, and then we have this situation, here's what it really looks like. That takes some trust for you to be in there and have that conversation and then dig in, feel and take part of it. So what kind of a relationship do you need to create in order to permit that conversation? That's where we are now, right? That takes cultivation.
And I know this is not part of the presentation, but qualifying a donor is a major mindset shift, and we've encountered with clients. We coach many clients. It's a big piece of our business, and Jason's actually available. You can QR this to schedule time if you want to have a conversation with them. But one of the first things we do, and we do very effectively, is get you into having conversations where you're asking good questions. We've had so many people say, this feels really weird. I'm going to ask them like what their dreams are and things like, right? And the answer is yes, you are, and we're going to find ways to ask it in a way that works for you. But that is incredibly important to be able to ask them questions that instead of you going in there as if you're just on trial and trying to blurt out everything you do, but to ask them good questions to understand who they are is absolutely a fundamental practice in being a good development professional. Being able to find out what drives them is something that can only happen if you ask them questions and you sit there and listen to what they have to say. There's no shortcut around that. And that is something that's something you do well by practice. You get used to it. And you'll find that all your hesitations that you might have and say, I live in Lakewood, I get 3.5 minutes, there's a cynicism that exists, like quid pro quo. We did a pre-campaign study where we interviewed major donors for one of the largest schools in Lakewood. And one of the board members said, there's no way anyone's gonna be shot. So I said, can I role play with you, right now on the call? And he said, sure. And I did it with him, and I wasn't even done. He goes, okay, I got it. Right. Maybe he was too afraid to answer the questions I was asking him. But he's like, okay, I understand what you're saying. Like, it's even for the donors, a lot of these donors, especially in our world, have never encountered somebody to sit down with them and have this kind of conversation. And if you are that person who does it, it's like the person who writes a handwritten note in the age of emails, right? People are gonna go, whoa. Like I just came out of a half-an-hour meeting with Rabbi Goldstein from Joan Dax Beis Yaakov, and like, that was like intense. Like that was a real, like they come away feeling amazing. They like talked about why I've been giving to Joan Dax for 15 years. He asked me good questions. Like it elevates everything. And I guarantee the next time Rabbi Goldstein walks into that meeting, he's not looking around saying, oh, I see you're a Chicago White Sox fan, right? You're not looking for the superficial stuff because your relationship is already at another level where now you're going in to look for ways to demonstrate the work that you're doing based on what they've actually shared with you. All right, I think we're good, right? All right. Thank you very much for your time.